Okay, let me see. All right, Ted, let me make an introduction about you and who you are and tell everybody about your brilliance. So everyone, Ted is a long-term collaborator of the University of the Underground. He's been with us since the very, very early days. Ted has been a cultural attache. He's been helping to put together a lot of the fundraising forms that, you know, eventually got us some funding to start doing the University of the Underground. He has been working a lot in independent publishing as well. He was the partnership director for McSweeney's, which is one of the most, I would say, cutting edge, publisher, who is run by Dave Eggers, one of our board members in the US. So he was helping them as well to try and fundraise and, try and make people understand the value of culture in the US.
I apologize for adjusting the angle, but
no, I like that. I very much like that. And then Ted, you've been you graduated from Harvard. Yes, graduated from Harvard. That is possible. He made it happen. And you came out and you wrote your thesis.
Yeah, so here's a little bit about me. I went to school, to Harvard, to be a literary critic. I studied with a guy named James Wood, who's the New Yorker fiction critic, and learned a lot there. But when I left school, I realized that job just didn't exist anymore. So I really looked for where are other places you can apply a critical intelligence that are interesting and important. And food and art really struck to me as areas which maybe had not had that same type of intelligence applied to them, particularly food. So when I moved out to San Francisco, I started working for free at McSweeney's and the Believer magazine, and eventually worked my way up to partnerships and cultivation directors, where I met Nellie. And also on the side, I was writing essays about the kind of clash of how kind of food represents other issues of cultural evolution, class, and kind of look to frame kind of politics, aesthetics, and kind of a class specifically for food. And I had one breakout essay called Bach at the Burger King, where I talked about fast food restaurants using Baroque music to
hold on. Don't tell them everything straight away, like the first
sorry. Highly recommend it. I'll send it around.
Ted is a machine. He can go nonstop. But Ted, it's very important what you're going to tell them, because it's a fact that we've not spoken at all about food at the moment as a form of resistance and as a means to build new politics as well. Food. And it's been really, it came to my mind that you're doing this podcast, which is about food, which is about the politics behind food, and the New Yorker, and the kind of the ethics and politics behind any form of food critics. And so so today we thought that we would be able to have like a little dinner time with you. So I don't know how you want to play this. I'll let it all up to you, but take your time. You have 1 hour with us, so we all ears. And while you do that, I'm going to just put some stuff in the chat bot as well. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. So I thought, just to be kind of light, I would pull out. I'm not trying to tell people what to think, but more thinking about kind of tools that you can use to look at the way that kind of design helps construct politics, identity, and kind of through food. So I picked 5 kind of items that represent different kind of discourses when talking about identity. And I think one thing that I'm very interested in is the degree to which people, there's the commodification of personal identity. So people, the brands they buy, the foods they buy versus other things, becomes a way for them to say who they are. And there's both, benefits and also a lot of dangers for that. So I just wanted to do something kind of fun and interesting, and then kind of pull out 5 kind of items that I think show very different ways of looking at food, and then kind of open it up to questions. These items are going to be, maybe I'm going to have a slightly more critical take on them. So I have not prepared the new politics of food, that is something that's very interesting and something I'm thinking about. But so I just wanted to kick it off, and then we'll kind of see where things go.
Go ahead, please.
So the first thing I wanted to pull out is something very simple. These are the kettle chips. Oh, it's being reflected opposite on Etsy. So this is a kettle brand potato chips, and this has to do with how the construction of what I would call the natural, and what we think the natural is. The second thing is, this is called Alter Eco Quinoa, but this is a variety of new global mission-saving kind of alternate grains, which are sold as upmarket kind of food alternatives. And on the package, it says, you know, the super grain of the Andes, fairly traded, hand-cultivated, nourishing foodie, farmer, and field. So that's an idea of like politics for quinoa, apparently. This one is pretty funny. I don't know if you, this is a famous IPA called the Arrogant Bastard IPA. It is like, and this is like sort of one of the initial IPAs in this sort of hand brew or kind of craft brewing burst in California. And this, I think, has a lot to do with kind of male identity and masculinity for drinks. You know, you could talk about the same thing about how wine are marketed to women, but I think this one is particularly funny. The fourth one is going to be, these are power bars or energy bars. And the thing that's funny to me about that is this notion that in like the last couple of years, there's been a rebranding of candy bars by just adding protein powder to them, or all of a sudden energy, or kind of health food bars. And I think this has to do with the notion of health, and also that notion of your machine, of your body as a machine and fuel. And I think that's quite interesting. And the last one, this is just very funny. So this is boxed water. It says boxed water is better. And there's a big movement right now about repackaging water and different items as some environmentally political protest kind of choice. And we'll end here. I'm gonna, dive right in. So we're going to start with these areas, right? They're matte, they're brown, great taste naturally, and they have a non-GMO verified sticker on it. They have a certified gluten-free, and on the back they have a variety of promises. So they have like a sort of chalkboard style kind of illustration. They say, the Kettle brand potato chips strive to be mindful of our environmental footprint. In 2019, we launched an initiative that uses 43% less packaging than before. This cuts our annual greenhouse gas emissions from packaging in half, and over 2 million pounds of plastic waste of the landfill, out of the landfill, excuse me. And there's a variety of things that says like, meet your farmer, tater cracker, our natural promise. And all of this is written in kind of designed in a style of like as though we're handwritten on a chalkboard. The brown matte backs are very kind of carefully chosen because they want, this is how it feels natural. Something like a Lay's potato chips, which is so plastic and kind of brightly colors, feels unnatural. But this actually feels much more natural to the kind of common person. But one thing that's interesting when we talk about naturally is naturally actually refers to natural chemistry. So whenever you see something that is natural, that just refers to a type of chemistry they use to construct to make the food. So there's this whole language of claims that are actually meant to deceive you. Or and one other interesting thing is that the average consumer now wants 5.4 claims on every package. And 69% of consumers say that reading influences their purchase decisions. So there's this idea that, and one of the things that's interesting about this chart in particular is that it kind of implies in a strange, magical, counterintuitive thinking that by consuming a bag of potato chips, you're actually lowering your environmental impact, when it's the exact opposite. So it creates this kind of emotional mystification, where it's trying to convince you that the very thing that actually contributes to environmental kind of waste is somehow a bold act, a bold protest against it. And the thing this is sort of a trick mirror diet food. One of the things that's very interesting about the language of diet foods and natural foods is they actually lead you statistically to consume more of them. So there's a famous study about Diet Coke, which shows that like if people consume more Diet Coke than they would normal Coke because they think it's healthier for them, when in fact it's not. There's no health claims that show that. So a lot of these kind of natural claims are designed to actually make you be less healthy, kind of less natural. So, and one of the other key things about this are negative claimers. So there's like non-GMO, non-fat, never frozen, which is interesting because in the high-end products, they never need to tell you that. But it's something that it's very clear for middle-class products. A lot of it is negative claims. So that's how I would describe kind of natural. And one of the things that's important about this is that like it's about how natural feels, not what it actually is. And that's sort of the designer's task, and they've done it very brilliantly with this chip. Is that like this somehow feels more natural than more kind of garish products, and that's something that is kind of a deeply culturally kind of ingrained feeling. So on to the second one, which is in many ways the funniest, is called Alter Eco Organic Red Heirloom Quinoa, Super Grain of the Andes. And I'm just going to read some of the labels on the market, or excuse me, some of the language on the packaging. So it says organically grown, fairly traded, hand cultivated. And then it says, revered by ancient Incas as Chisaya Mama, or mother grain, this heirloom nutrition source is fluffier, nuttier, and without the bitterness so common to lesser grades. And then it says, 100% traceable ingredients, 112 villages building a prosperous future. Unexplained where the villages are, but that's somehow linked to this. And 5,600 llamas for healthy soil. We believe in the power of food. Eating heirloom, organic, and non-GMO keeps families healthy and strong. Fair and direct trade sustains farmers and ecosystems, and delivering food with carbon insetting will mean a brighter future for us all. Learn more at the alterecofoods.com. And then they say on their website, this is part of a new onset of specialty products that have a mission. And often these missions are like global in scale. And so literally the mission of this organization is, our mission at Alter Eco is global transformation. And we see another another product that sells alternative dairy products, whose mission is, you shouldn't have to choose between good taste and good ethics. And so what we see a lot of these things is that they're marketing an upscale product, like an overexpensive product, that magically aligns one's upper scale taste with kind of global transformation. And so I think that one thing that's interesting is this is an example of what I would call kind of social justice taste. And this is particularly prevalent in San Francisco, where I live, and is this idea that what companies are doing is that they are trying to create a way to kind of bridge the dissonance between a lot of kind of younger millennials, kind of very hyper progressive politics, and their sort of very bourgeois upper class taste. And so this is how they kind of do that. And one thing that's actually quite interesting about this is that 9 out of 10 millennials are more likely to buy from food companies that share their views on key social issues. And last year, I think 55% said that they would pay more for those products. So we see that like now there's a tendency to outsource activism, or not activism, outsource action to companies sometimes with a certain brand of millennials, where they're looking to saying, well, I want the kind of big giant corporations to be the agents of change. And that can be kind of a very dangerous attitude. And one of the ironies of this is that after eating quinoa has been a cheap staple crop for thousands of years in Bolivia. But after this kind of quinoa boom in the last 5 years, actually a lot of Bolivian farmers can't even afford it anymore. And so soaring quinoa prices have led Bolivian farmers to abandon other agricultural commodities that they might need to create kind of a diverse ecosystem and only focus on quinoa. And it's become and as it's become one of the world's most popular health foods, like the UN announced like 2013 was the year of quinoa. It was the alternate grain that was supposed to be a healthy, cheap alternative for a variety of people. Then the people who are actually producing it in Bolivia and the Andes have actually switched over to cheaper kind of junk food. And so that's an example of something where actually market forces that are not applied conscientiously kind of disrupt a kind of a natural situation, a kind of natural ecosystem in a kind of local economy and create greater unhealth. And so that's another challenge with this particular genre of the kind of what I call the social justice taste, is that sometimes it achieves the exact opposite of what it's aiming to do. So that's
can you clarify how these brands work with creatives and poets and others? Did you hear me?
Yeah. One thing that's interesting is that
it sounds like obviously they've been writing with copywriter. I mean, one of our students at the University of the Underground was actually a copywriter for some of these brands. And he was like, I remember when he wrote us his letter, he was telling us that he invented one of the slogans for a toothpaste company or something like that. Like, this kind of like, can you unpack it a bit more? How
Sure. So this is a larger trend in the culture, is that all of a sudden now companies imagine themselves as like storytellers or telling their story constantly on social media. And in general, one of the things that social media has done, one of its impacts, is it's moved the internet away from like an information vessel into something that is like a storytelling machine. And so now everything and everyone has to be telling a story. And so everyone feels this pressure, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, to kind of be telling the greater story of their lives. And then what happened is that companies have the same pressure. And so you started seeing like 4 or 5 years ago, actually, when I was at McSweeney's, we saw this as companies would come in and they'd want us to help teach them a storytelling workshop, or they'd want us to tell their story. And one of the things that was quite interesting is that like often there wasn't that much of a story to tell sometimes. And what we would have is that like their mission statement was literally to make profit. That was their mission statement. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of hard for us. Like, let's say mission statement and support the greater good. And I'm like, what does that mean? But there's a lot of it is this sort of coping mechanism where people with progressive tastes often, or progressive politics, are working in big capitalist, big corporate entities. And so they have to pursue profit. But at the same time, they feel they want to make these symbolic gestures to how their company is supporting kind of the larger, greater good. And I'm not trying to say these companies never do anything that's good. I'm approaching it purely from a cultural, not an economic perspective. And so what's interesting is that there is a lot of room for designers and for writers to go to companies and make a good living, helping them tell their story. But one of the key things that's important is telling responsible stories, telling true stories, and also not every company maybe is committed to saving the Andes or something.
Interesting, because we were going to have like a dinner class with you, but you picked. Do you recognize this item that you picked as being like, food for you, or how come you pick this item? I'm just trying to, I understand but like, are they a representation of like American food at this point in time, or for you?
Yeah, I think this is a representation of how a lot of millennials eat right now. And it's sort of political eating, I would say. So I think there's a lot of times
in San Francisco.
In San Francisco, in LA, in New York, like there's just a lot of people they make a statement about their politics through the brands they buy, and certain foods they choose to consume. And often and there's different degrees of how effective that political statement is or how intense it is. So there's some folks who are, if you were like a vegan in the 90s or something, that was a very strong and countercultural choice, because you really had to stay home, cook a lot of food, and it was very difficult to find food outside of your house or your community where that was going to meet your ethical standards. But now, by creating a lot of substitute products or products like this, it's become a less intense political choice, and it's also become more of almost a lifestyle choice as well. And so there's this sort of a mixing between lifestyle and politics that I think is very appealing to a certain genre of millennials and kind of just consumers in general, and something that I think that all designers and thinkers should be aware of and think about and understand.
Do you think the next American election is going to play out on the package of this kind of food?
Yes, the big trends are more people in the world have dietary restrictions than ever before, something like 40%. So that's big. Eco-responsive. The two competing trends are convenience and environmental responsibility. So people cook at home 20% as much now as they did 30 years ago. So and they want food delivered as quickly as possible. But at the same time, even though they want super convenient food, the other issue is they want companies and food brands that support a kind of responsible environment and sustainability. And those two goals in many ways could be at odds. So there's an idea that like they want their life to be as easy as possible or to be as convenient as possible, but other entities need to go through great measures to create a sustainable environment. So those are kind of the two kind of competing two major trends in the last few years.
Keep going. Sorry, I like interrupted you. We were at the beer bottle.
Shall we go on to the third item?
I mean, bring it on, keep them coming.
So this is
actually, Alexi, can we have Alexi participating here? Are you still in California? Do you use this product?
I don't like the taste of this product. This is an idea.
Hold on.
This is called Arrogant Bastard Ale. On the back, it has the definition of arrogance, and it has a very great paragraph on the back, and it says, "This is an aggressive beer. You probably won't like it. It is quite doubtful that you have the taste or sophistication to be able to appreciate an ale of this quality and depth. We would suggest that you stick to safer and more familiar territory, maybe something of a multi-million-dollar ad campaign aimed at convincing you it's made in a little brewery, or one that implies their tasteless fizzy yellow beer will give you more sex appeal. Perhaps you think multi-million-dollar ad campaigns make a beer taste better. Perhaps you're mouthing your words as you read this. We believe that pandering to the lowest common denominator represents the height of tyranny, a virtual form of keeping the consumer barefoot and stupid. Brought upon an unsuspecting public in 1997, Arrogant Bastard Ale openly challenged the tyrannical overlords who were brazenly attempting to keep Americans chained in the shackles of poor taste. Since the very beginning, Arrogant Bastard Ale has revealed in its unprecedented and uncompromising celebration of intensity. There have been many nods to Arrogant Bastard Ale, even outright attempts to copy it, but only one can ever embody the true nature of liquid arrogance." So so this is like the counterculture kind of backlash against kind of over advertising, and it is trying to appeal very explicitly to, you won't like this beer, and the idea that like intensity or flavors and teaching yourself to like something that you might not actually like is a sign of your intelligence, sophistication, and particularly I found that men tend to like IPAs, even though often their actual flavor can be quite bitter for a lot of people, and they are for me, which is interesting. But why do people want to say they like these beers or spend the time to like something that's so intense? And I think it goes beyond that. It goes to something that I see, and I also have I've seen a lot of particularly white men go into like, they do brewing on the side, they brew beer, they brew, and I think that they're looking for other avenues to express their identity. If in a kind of multicultural ecosystem, there aren't a lot of ways to express your identity as like a white straight male. You kind of look to other avenues to kind of express yourself, and I think that's part of the hipster phenomenon. I define the hipster as sort of like an authenticity vampire. They just kind of like latch on to other cultures or other things and kind of like take that as their thing, and it's really important. And one of the things that's very important is that it's a public performance of this. So it's not enough for you to have this beer just in the privacy of your home. Like you want to see other people, you want to put down other people's choices and other people's tastes. And that sort of sense of aggression and superiority, I think, becomes very important to a construction of a certain type of kind of male hyper-aggressive kind of identity. So that's something that's interesting to me. And it's very different than the appeal that might be made on like a very generic, a Miller Lite brand, which, as they said, they're trying to appeal to everyone. And so I think that you see a lot of these small craft kind of breweries or kind of beverages that are meant to give people a different avenue to kind of express themselves through taste. Then I'm going to go to these protein bars that are interesting to me. So one is a little more upscale and one is more kind of a little more chintzy. This is called Tiger's Milk. It says 0 grams trans fat, America's original nutrition bar. And then it's energy packed snack, fortified with vitamins and minerals and protein rich. And then this is called RX bar, and it's a very particular type of, it just says free, it has like a very chemical kind of packaging, 3 egg whites, 14 peanuts, 2 dates, no BS. And it's clear and brown. And so you see there's kind of like a different appeal to how they view health. Like this particular thing is designed as like, basically they have a candy bar and now they're going to add energy and they're going to add they're going to add vitamins and they're going to add protein and all of a sudden it goes from when you add these kind of artificial things to a kind of chocolate bar, all of a sudden it becomes an energy bar, a nutrition bar. And this particular thing is emphasizing like the purity of its recipe. It has no BS and it's very clear, and it kind of makes an appeal to science, as though this idea that like, because it's so kind of clear and scientifically constructed, you know it's going to be healthy. And I think what's interesting about these kind of genres of health food in general is the like what defines the kind of existential category of a food. Like in the last couple of years, the idea of bar as food or shake as food has really risen to prominence with kind of like gym culture and people working out, and this idea that you are constantly quantifying or treating the kind of the things going into your body, and so your body becomes like a mathematical equation that you control the numbers on, and you are aware of all the different kinds of, and all of a sudden it moves from like a kind of a more spiritual or kind of intellectual category into sort of a chemical kind of sphere that you're able to control quite exactly. And that's what's interesting, is that the culture is obsessed with counting everything that goes into a body, and that gives you the illusion of control. And I think and what's interesting about, particularly about diet culture in general, is there's some diets, right, that will say only meat. That's the only thing you're going to eat. And then there's other diets that will say the exact opposite. There's, it's only vegetables or only raw things. And how can all of these things be healthy, right? And I think a lot of it is that dieting is sort of like almost a magic spell that says, I'm going to pay attention to the things that go into my body. And that type of form of attention is what actually creates, difference in people losing weight and things like that, even though that kind of, that whole rhetoric of talking about your kind of body as kind of a health machine invites a variety of, potentially good and also potentially kind of dangerous ways of kind of reducing yourself or circumscribing your kind of your spirit as an individual. So I think that that's something that, excuse me, lost my place. When we're talking about health, is the sort of semiotics of health is, it's interesting because so much of it is about what you just happen to believe and what types of different kinds of images or language resonates with you. So well, some person might really respond to this kind of brand. Another person might really respond to something with like lots of pictures of nature on it, or very. And there's a lot of studies that show that you can even pinpoint to the specific words that show which types of people respond to certain words and which people don't. And a lot of this has to do with like how you can use language and design to allows someone to create meaning in their life and use whatever a specific item is as something that is either for them as part of their identity or as something that is like opposed against it. And that's something that I think is, so health becomes a sort of intellectual construct in a way. And also there's the whole metaphor of the body as an engine that needs fuel is something that has really kind of risen in prominence the last few years. And that's something that, also buys into, reinforces messages of efficiency and I fall into it too. And you start to judge how you're doing on a specific task. Have you met this task? Have you been able to achieve the most efficient outcome? And a lot of times when you're a writer, artist, designer, you kind of need to let that kind of subside, is that sometimes work just takes a long time to finish. You work on it a few days and then you kind of need to put it down for a week. And if you try to power through and finish and not let it take its natural course, then it'll be stilted and unoriginal. So a lot of this kind of particular rhetoric I find can be dangerous to creators, because it really is, you kind of need to work and move at your own pace. And it may take a couple hours or it could take months. And that's the kind of approach you kind of need to go into creation, in my opinion. And then the last product, after which we can ask questions, or maybe Nelly has some more follow-ups.
Well, there was actually a point by Liam, but Liam, are you gone already? Maybe he's gone already, I don't know. Instead of me reading his note, but he was talking about high school in Canada. So he was saying to you that you remember in high school in Canada being taught that we could incite structural change to making better choices as consumer. Although we all have a responsibility to consume differently, I feel like this kind of mass marketing that pander to our Western millennial, ideas of sustainable, responsible living is just another way for our neoliberal system to put the weight of the environmental crisis on the individual, when clearly the change must be a structural political level.
Yeah,
he's gone, but he was thanking you for your class.
No, that's very true. Like one of the best examples, have they banned plastic straws in places outside of California? That's like a good example of something which is like 70% of the world's waste is produced by these kind of major fossil fuel companies, but there's a impetus to put the need for change on the consumer, and often that can be sort of a very crushing existential weight. And so one thing I think in the kind of, there's almost too many choices for consumers. And I think what ends up happening is that people's identity becomes outsourced into the consumption, the products they choose to buy, their consumption choices, rather than, their actual actions, their ideas, the beliefs they follow. And I think that that's something that is particularly kind of paralyzing, and the kind of, Chipotle model of the kind of current marketplace, where every single item you go to, they want you to make 20 choices about, and you have it in the back of your mind, even if you're aware of this kind of this kind of narrative, like, oh, am I getting the perfect burrito, the perfect pizza, the perfect sandwich, the perfect salad? And you waste your energy on kind of making these insignificant choices rather than major decisions. And decisions is probably the right word. Decidere means to cut off. And so when you make a decision, you cut off one possibility. And that's sort of like what I think a lot of, as a designer, or an artist, or a thinker, it's important to make decisions and not choices. You make a few key decisions about what you believe in and what you're trying to create, and live by those, and not be distracted by, all the myriad choices that one could make. So this is the last one, and then I open up the question. This is just boxed water. And so this says boxed water is better. On the back, it says sustainable, pure, thoughtful. Number 1% for the planet, and then just a hello. And what's interesting is that about this particular item is that it just turns packaging into like a form of identity, or into a form of philosophy or political statement, as though that, now there's so many, when you go to one of these grocery stores, there's like 20 different brands of water, And there's just so much energy that is like, why do people actually buy water? Nothing really tastes that much better between brands. There's not like a real kind of difference, but a lot of there's this sort of modern complex of like repackaging rather than reimagining. And a lot of energy or effort is put into just repackaging the same things in a way that appeals or triggers to certain types of identities. Like there's another brand of water called Liquid Death, which is a brand made by a Netflix creative director. And they're trying to sell it like as a beer brand to like men. And he said that like, I don't want to go shop at the water from Whole Foods because that's for yoga moms. And there's an idea that every single group or identity deserves their own personal water, their own personal something speaking specifically to them. And maybe that's not how the marketplace is the best use of the marketplace's energy, is to create 20 versions of each product speaking to each specific splinter identity group. And that can actually be distracting, as though that we're looking to this, packaged water to save the world rather than ourselves. So that's something that I think is you see in a lot of these kind of progressive seeming or kind of political seeming kind of repackaging of simple products. And I think that all of these are all ways, I think, that the sort of tendrils of consumer branding and design and our natural impulse for kind of self-belief, self-delusion can kind of collide and kind of intermix. And it shows us that like what we eat is essential to like what we are. And I think that there's that these different forces all kind of intermix and get into people's minds or subconscious or self-consciousness, and increasingly make food and our choices about what we eat much more important to an expression of our identity at this particular moment in the culture.
Right. So what are we going to eat now, Ted? Now that you did all of this, like, I mean, what's the ideal nutrition for someone from the University of the Underground who is working on a on a brief on dance and resistance? Well, Alexi, step in now that you're from California. You were in California too.
Yeah, I spent 10 years in London, so this is the longest time I've spent in America in 10 years. I have realized that, especially since I grew up in Detroit, and marketing perspectives, but I think it's right. There is a touch on millennials and our food choices and the way our politics are consumed, because even in London, like, as more people moved into a certain area, the food was changing in the shop to cater to certain tastes. And you can see that it was more health food, more organic. But I mean, I've been in lockdown. I came to LA 2 days after lockdown. So I have to see more when I'm out. But
so you've not tasted the Netflix water, then?
What?
You've not tasted the Netflix water that Ted just mentioned.
But I think it happens. I mean, it's definitely happening in London too, but America, where like our whole identity is around what we consume, right? And like our power is through what we are consuming. Like that's how people practice their politics here, more so than what I experienced in England. And so I think that this talk was interesting, yeah.
But do we have another perspective, like, Merv from Turkey and Laolu from Nigeria? Tell us a bit of do you have all of the, is it that at that level in Turkey?
Yeah, actually in Turkey, I was working as a brand designer in a bar company.
It's true,
and also I produced olive oil, and like 5 years I did my own brand and I sell it in the market. So it's kind of same perspective, of course, but it's all about consumer choices now. So it depends that which kind of like if you want to be in the popular culture and if you want to be in the capitalism, so and then if you want to sell a lot of it so you have to follow these rules actually as a brand designer, for example, if you are working in that kind of company. So this is the only way. But if you prefer just to be a local one and then you can just go with it, and then you can find consumers in that way, and then you can give information to the consumers in that, and from that perspective, actually.
Because I think it's important to say that you have your own olive oil brand. I mean, and Ted actually has been doing a lot about olives. I mean, I can't remember, you had like this whole podcast on olives before.
Oh, I worked at the Olive Garden for a couple of years, which is a big Italian-American chain, pretty funny actually. And I learned a lot there. And they had a very specific, you know, it was an Italian-American chain invented in Orlando. So there's a lot of like fake Italian things. So it's really about how like, right, a Midwestern kind of middle-class white American would view Italian. So for example, the front word, the opening word is called Hospitaliano, ! Which is not a word that exists in Italian. And if you've been to Italy, in Italian restaurants, like they're not necessarily famed for like their hospitable service, right? You know, it's not their, and you see a lot of dishes where it'll be like, something
it's like the brand image of, sorry.
Yeah, no, please go ahead. Yeah.
It's like the brand image of Italy about food culture, especially on olive oil. Actually, generally they are buying from Turkey and also like putting like bottling in Italy and then selling it to US under the name of produced in Italy. So it's like, especially olive oil business is very complicated actually, and very open to do like many things in it. So if you don't have this gusto, you know, the taste, that it's really hard to understand that if it's real or not, if you don't have that in your culture. So it depends on
what about your olive oil, Merv? Are we going?
Yeah, my olive oil is a premium one actually, but we were selling in the very, very big markets, but we were spending a lot of effort, so our margins was a little bit lower than the others, because they were buying the olive oil from for example different countries and very cheap prices, and bottling it in Turkey, but because they are brand for 100 years, so this is very easy to produce for them. So it's like a business issue, completely a business issue. So
did you stop? Are you not doing olive oil anymore?
I'm doing it individually, but we stopped the brand, and the name of the brand is Pina, by the way, coming from Pina Bausch. And then like
on the chat so we can check it out, you know, we can.
Yeah, okay, I will send. And then now the brand was selling in Carrefour, like Metro, groceries and everything, but because of capitalism again, because we were entrepreneurs, like romantic entrepreneurs, so it was not easy to compete with them because of all these issues actually. Like even you are trying to create a brand image, if you're in US or if you're in UK, it's easy to find that kind of consumer actually. If you're in Turkey, so because people doesn't have that power to buy that, they give that much money for a bottle of olive oil. So it doesn't matter if you are doing this like very fancy branding or just that kind of stuff. So it will be like the consumer will be going to the cheaper ones, you know, like, so it's like I support that like you are what you eat culture actually at the moment, because you are what you eat at least. So the consumer needs to know that what they are eating, this is their responsibility to find the producer, to check for how it's produced, and then who is doing that. So it's all the consumer's responsibility, but nobody's spending any time on the shelves anymore, just buying and following this kind of trend. So it's not brand's problem. I think it's the problem of the people and the consumer.
Laulu, where are you? Talking about what is inside the plate of Alexei.
Yeah, I'm here.
What's the status in Lagos?
I think first of all, I would like to point out that there's a food there's an obsessed person, someone obsessed with food in the house. Immediately Ted started speaking about rappers, I had to invite her in. She's Amira. There's somewhere. So I'm sure she's enjoying this. She's done research on decolonizing our diets. That's like Africa. So I don't know, with colonialism and everything, you know, a lot of food came in that we're not used to. And a very common example, I think, is milk, where, our milk was something entirely different. And what you find is that over 100 years later, a lot of us are still lactose intolerant. Same here, but I love milk. Once this is done, I'm getting milk as well. But I think to what Ted was saying, right now, I think there's a lot of, with capitalism, there's a lot of advertisements and all of that. And then before you know, there's this feeling of if whatever you're having is not imported, then it can't be good. So that's like the current sort of state in Nigeria right now, I think. If you're having cereal, if you're having milk, and it's not, it's not imported, if there's not that imported tag on it, then it's just not good enough.
So you mean that for the millennial, it's not like, like it is in the US, basically, like this kind of idea of identity through your...
No. For us, it's an economic thing. It has to be imported for it to sort of be good.
I think the reason why we still have that in Nigeria is very centered around, like, basically like an inferiority complex, like whatever is non-African is seemingly better. And whereas, because I live in Canada now, so I see how like all Canadians want to do now is to like shop local, get everything from local farmers. Well, in Nigeria, all we want is to get everything imported. So it's very...
And so where do you get, so you only get imported food, or are you and Laulu doing like your own making, or what's the...
I live in Canada now, and I left Nigeria when I was 16, so I wasn't doing a lot of cooking at the time that I left. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, I'll be honest as well. I don't do a lot of cooking as well, so buying out the way.
Okay, well, thank you. So what do we have? We have Alex saying, where are you? I mean, I'm just saying exactly the same thing. Okay, so Alex, you are saying interesting that Nigeria still value imported food, while in Europe, at least there is a massive push to eat as locally as possible. But anyway, that's what you guys were saying.
In the Soleil article I shared, she talks a little bit about the idea that only like 66% of the world population is lactose intolerant. The people who, if you're from European descent, then you're used to digesting, milk and cheese. And it's interesting is because then American culture and capitalism advertisements drive international tastes, then a variety of people, people start eating diets that might actually, their bodies may not consume, are not going to consume in the right way, and can be uncomfortable. And there's a lot of, there's some Black vegan movements in the US, particularly in Portland, that are very much focused on that. And this goes back to what Nelly said at the beginning about using food as a political statement, but there are a lot of movements that are trying to kind of move away from the kind of streamlined mainstream American diet as the like kind of universal diet, and kind of discovering kind of more diasporic kind of traditions, and kind of going back to kind of
we have a comment from Adnan from talking about the Middle East actually perspective. Where are you, Adnan? Let's keep going on our world tour of food.
This is not necessarily just limited to food, it's for everything. I was just amused when you talked about arrogant ale and boxed water and liquid death, because over here on this side of the world, it just feels like everything gets good here, and there's very little that's skewed towards it. And you can see that contrast when you, let's say, you walk down the more poor areas of the Middle East, where you'll see a poster of a Ray-Ban ad contrasted with how it completely does not speak to the local consumer, and then becomes an aspirational thing that speaks on colonialism, consumerism, identity. And then on the other hand, you have a sneaker festival where everyone shows up, and then you have any semblance of merging with local identity celebrated, because you can suddenly see yourself in the clothing line that you wear, and they're dying for that, but all they end up doing is consuming what's outside.
We lost you, Anand, or maybe I lost him. Anand?
Hi. Did you not hear any of that?
I didn't hear the last line.
Oh, the last comparison I made was streetwear brands. Because so you can also see that in streetwear brands over here. You'll have a streetwear festival here, and everything's from outside, but the very little semblance of any international brand doing some sort of collab with a local personality, some semblance of local culture mixed in there, celebrated like as if they're dying for some sort of representation. And I found that amusing because I see so much of it, all the way in California.
And thank you so much, Anand, for sharing this. And we have actually a comment as well. Elena, where are you? Sorry. Ted, is Ted still here? Because I cannot even see.
I'm thinking about the question about sexuality.
Well, Elena, do you want to ask, where are you?
Yes. Hello, Ted. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's amazing. I just want to ask you, I see a connection between the way that sexualities became a political issue and food became a political issue. So I'm wondering if you see any connections between the two, and if you have any kind of statement about that. I think that the moment that we are becoming more like fluid in a way in relation to our sexuality, maybe at the same time we're becoming more like strict in relation to our food. I don't know, I'm just asking, what do you think?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm gay, and I have been interviewing there are a couple of gay food magazines that have come out recently. I've interviewed a guy named John Birdsall. I'll send a link to it, about asking him what he thought gay food was. And he wrote an essay that won a James Beard Award, which is the culinary kind of award, the culinary Oscars, about the influence of a variety of gay men kind of shaping American eating. James Beard was gay at the time, and there was a little enclave of sort of gay gourmands in I think Soho or the Village in New York City, who kind of helped redefine American eating towards something that's more indulgent and more kind of rich. And there's a couple of other people there's a guy named what's this guy's name? There's a few other chefs who have been instrumental in doing that. So I am thinking about writing an essay on this, but I'm a little dubious, actually, to be honest with you. It's something I've been debating whether it's worth writing a negative essay. I think that there are some definite connections between, the mindset of being, someone who's queer, and you kind of have a slightly outsider kind of point of view and are more creative. But in another way, food is like one of the best, most concrete manifestations of different types of ethnicities and races, obviously. And so it's a very clear way to share that culture. And there's a desire, I think, for a variety of people to find every type of their identity in something else. So I want to have what does gay food taste like? And I'm like, I don't know, but I mean, I know what, what Vietnamese food tastes like, what Turkish food tastes like. And so it's something I'm actually actively debating about whether or not that is overreach for people. And let me put it this way: people can find meaning in whatever way that they find meaning in their lives. And so if you think that being gay informs your cooking in a really meaningful way, more power to you. I don't want to take it away from anything, but whether or not it's a separate category and cultural movement, it makes me. It's something that I'm debating right now, as to whether or not every aspect of identity has to have a clear representation in every other sphere of activity, or if that actually potentially takes away from other really substantial manifestations of it. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on it. So.
Anyone want to kind of take up from the comment of Ted? Elena, I think I can see your.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy from your answer. I think I'm thinking the same issues. I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's obvious that, but I think that there is also in Europe, like there is something like emerging communities between queer people, veganism, gay people, and some other cultures. So I think it's very interesting to see how sexuality and food, they became political in the era that we live now. So that's my question. I think it's not a question, it's a point, and I think it's your presentation. It's related, and yeah, we need to think more about it, I think.
I have a comment. So I'm not a dietitian yet, but I'm well on my way. And a lot of times when I think about like food recommendations to different people, I like to be conscious of how like personal identities would affect like the foods that people consume. And from what I've seen in terms of like gender identities, not sexual identities, a lot of it ends up being exploited. And so like in the end, capitalism, it's still going to try to exploit like those gender identities. And so like milkshakes, for instance, and also like toxic masculinity. And so when selling like things that are milkshakes and all those things, they try to make it seem more feminine. And I'd recommend like having like smoothies to some men, and they'd say, oh no, like that's for women. And so like, how is there food for men and how is there food for women? Like I find it really hard to wrap my head around it. Even like when like in a lot of ads that are sent, like anytime I see an ad and it's about steak, it's always a man. But like when it's like fruit juices, it's a woman. And so I feel like capitalism really exploits our gender identities in relation to the foods we eat.
Yeah. You should definitely, I strongly recommend reading Soleil Ho's, she's the new restaurant critic for the San Francisco Chronicle. And one of the things she talked about, like her words, she started her career by last year kind of a bang. And it was like a list of words she would never use in her reviews. And one of them was like the kind of girl or boy food, and talking about that kind of, certain foods are pitched as, kind of, and she likes foods like whiskey and a variety of foods that and foods and drinks that are not, traditionally feminine. And what's interesting too is that the language of wine is the opposite. There's a lot of languages between feminine and masculine wines that are described. And I think that is, how people attribute a variety of factors or characteristics to the things they eat and consume. And so much of that just is cultural, is this sort of cultural magic. And one thing that I'm interested in too is like that exploitation angle, because I feel that like for this particular magazine, which is called Genre, which is the first gay food magazine, it's made by white guys in Brooklyn. And, I'm all in favor of
No. We need to have this reference. Can you write them down into the chat bot as well? Because I think we have a lot of questions about that, like, I mean, I was going to say, I often don't understand the American accent. I shouldn't say that with such a strong French accent.
Named after a Frenchman. It's Alfred
Maybe you can type them, and meanwhile we can hear from Christopher. Christopher, where are you? You were talking. Keep typing and giving us reference, Ted, while we are hearing Christopher comment. Christopher, are you here? Christopher Gitti here, maybe, yeah. So you're saying, as a Mexican American living in the US, and since it's Cinco de Mayo, can you speak briefly about the US Americanized of the Mexican holiday?
Yeah, I mean, America is very big on or using other cultures and turning them into kind of opportunities to sell things and sell food. So it's, I think the Mexican, the connection between American and Mexican culture is obviously particularly huge in California. There's a good book called Taco USA by a guy who is, he's now the taco editor of Texas Monthly, and the first time they've appointed a taco editor, and kind of he's making the argument that it's sort of the essential American food. And there definitely is a bit of, a huge desire to turn, ethnicity and other cultures into a variety of outside props, like, St. Patrick's Day, for example. Like, what does Irish identity mean other than getting drunk, apparently? In the kind of advertorial kind of worldview, and you turn these, you take, significant events and turn them into an opportunity to sell things and give people permission to spend money and to drink. And I think that one of the, questions is that, like, how do you create your own, as an individual? I think that you should create the holidays or special occasions that mean something to you and observe those. And that's what I would say is you can create your own traditions and your own rituals. And so for you, Oscar Wilde is really important. And his birthday can be a personal holiday that are valuable as an artist or a creator or designer. You can kind of recreate the rituals and traditions that matter to you, and not let the wide scale commercialization of everything in this particular culture kind of, like, same thing's happening to Pride right now. A lot of people are unhappy about what's happening, but it's just across the board, because that's how a capitalist system operates. And there's the advantages are right that there's a huge rise in the middle class, income inequality, money going to the top recently, but it creates wealth, obviously. But the trade-off is that a lot of things become commercialized, and people will experience it as something to buy or spend money on, as rather than a culture or a tradition to actually live through and live by.
Okay, so with that in mind, I think it's a beautiful way of actually ending the conversation, is to just say to everyone that actually at the end of the day, maybe make your own ritual, your own food kind of rituals beyond what is actually on offer. And it got me a lot. I think we all got a lot to think about with the kind of selection of products, which you found us. Actually, I would have never thought, that actually I would think so much about the bottled water. But I think it's interesting to see that at the University of the Underground, we are always advocating for plurality. And it's interesting to see that when you see that happens in food products, there is something extremely problematic about it. At least from the way I feel now when I see all of these products, I respond to a set type of identity. I'm not feeling extremely comfortable about it. So I just wonder actually if plurality applied to food and to everything is actually really making a lot of sense, So, and I think Ted is sending he's putting more reference as well inside the chat section. Ted, do you want to also drop in your email if anyone wants to kind of reach out to you?
I did, yes. And I'm also going to send, this is an article I just wrote that's about restaurant criticism, and is kind of similar to some of these questions, and kind of also summarizes some other kind of points of view that might be a point of reference. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me if questions, comments, anything. I'm always around. I do get a lot of TED Talk jokes, TED Talk puns. That's sort of the go-to. So it's a proud tradition.
It is a good one. You must say it does work.
Right.
It does
all the time
do
when I was a waiter, all the time.
But Ted, I think so. You drop your email as well or no?
Yeah.
Is it in there? Okay, and also we have some reference as well for the olive oil from Merv, which we are all going to have a look into. But thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you all tomorrow. I can't remember what's happening tomorrow. Let me see. Do anyone knows? Because I don't remember.
Best of luck, everyone. Hope this was helpful, and thanks again, Nelly, for the opportunity.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye, Ted. And tomorrow we have Sufi. We are having an avatar workshop, everyone. So make sure you've done all of the first part. Part 1 is actually published on our Instagram. So make sure you follow and you do the different actions, because tomorrow we are making avatars. So anyway, thank you so much. Bye. Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in the conversation as well. You know, Amira, come back anytime. See you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.